let's have this discussion again. For the Americans that don't seem to be informed about Africa or what's going on in Africa, especially in terms of foreign policy, what would you say is a starting point?
There's different ways of doing this, but the main thing is making a human connection. That's where it all starts. So look, frankly, for the last, I'd say, 10 or 15 years, yes, I've been concerned and tried to learn as much as I've been able to about Ethiopia. But how did it start? It's really simple. I have 2 Ethiopian friends here in Denver, and I didn't know much about. I knew something about it. I mean, I taught a lot about Africa generically. I knew something, but it was the personal connection that that it just piqued my curiosity. There are a lot. Once you start looking at, of course, the differences between the United States and Ethiopia are significant, but there's some similarities. For example, when I look at this country, what is it, the contribution that it has to make to world civilization? Because we're right in the middle of whether or not we're going to be able to make that or not. And that contribution is, and needless to say, it hasn't happened yet. Is this an example of a place that was able to get over and conquer racism? Okay, that if we can do it, it's as if you look at the history, it looked like we were doing pretty well, or we were certainly moving ahead. Then the last 4 or 5 years, oh my gosh, I don't have to tell the listeners how bad the situation. But this is the American challenge. Okay, this is, if we can do it, this is what we have to offer world history. Nothing short of that. It's not our economic system. It's not new. The Dutch did it. The British did it. Others are doing it. It's not parliamentary democracy or political. No, we inherited that. If we can overcome the stigma that is so deep in the history of this country of racism, that would be really something. Well, in Ethiopia, 80 major ethnic groups. I guess it's probably not very much racial, maybe a little bit, but still linguistic racial groups. Can that, and the last I read, 200 languages, maybe more. Can a country with that kind of diversity, can it overcome its narrow-mindedness, if you like, its own form of bigotry? And I know there's a will, because I hear about it all the time from Ethiopian friends. So I'm not trying to simplify it. Obviously, for Ethiopia right now, this is a major crime. But Ethiopia and the United States, when you look what they have to offer in terms of global civilization and history, it's, hey, we overcame ethnic hatred. We overcame racism. It can be done. We're really not, despite our cultural differences, we're really one in this world. So that's the level that I look at Ethiopia as. It's like kind of, if you like, a parallel social experiment to what's happening here. And, one could go on. There's some other aspects to it, but that's the framework. So how do you begin? How do you begin to do that? Well, part of it, it starts off with some kind of human nexus, human connection. At least my experience is that's what keeps, that human connection is what keeps your interest in a foreign place. And if you don't have that human connection, then your political views, frankly, they're going to evaporate. So whether we're dealing with American connection to Ethiopia, again, my experience is it is much more historically in the Middle East and North Africa. But what I've noticed is there's this political movement, that political movement, they come and go. And also they change, they change their focus over time. But if you have a human connection with a place, an enduring connection, the politics will follow. So the challenge here in the United States is how to develop that human connection. And I'm not saying, there are probably more than one way to do that. But when I look at it, it's, well, some meeting place for Ethiopians and non-Ethiopian Americans to find common ground where we do both, where Ethiopian friends learn more about this country, and we, who are quite frankly mostly ignorant, and I put myself, in that, try to learn what I can, but let's not have any illusions. I'm not an expert on Ethiopia. That's how I see it done, and that's where I think it should begin. Let me add one thing. How friendships develop, they can develop for all kinds of reasons. But once my friendship with Ethiopians here developed and it strengthened, well, what is it they wanted from me? I'll tell you what they wanted, because it's not a secret and there's nothing cynical. This is what the friends said, and these people. They said, we're an isolated community. We want to break out of our isolation. We want to break out of it socially, and we want to break out of it politically. Can you help us? Okay. By the way, I'm not exactly what I consider to be any kind of political broker or in a position to do this, that, and the other thing. But I think that that's what they wanted, and that's where and they still want it. And we're still, quite frankly, at what I consider to be a pretty low level. There's an awful lot more that can be done. So there's that part of it. I think there's another part of it that really needs to be explored. Now, I'm saying this as an outsider, well, kind of an outsider, and that is that the Ethiopian community is part of a larger immigrant community, and that their interests are shared. So they're shared with Latin Americans, they're shared with Middle Easterners, they're shared with Asians. And I think there's all kinds of ways that there are real common interests there that keep coming up again and again and again. My interest in that is that my grandparents were immigrants, all of them. And although they're white and European, well, they're Jewish, but we're white, for at least the ones that come from Europe. I had a really hard time when they came to this country. It was not fun to be Jewish in 1910 or in 1930 here. And so when I see what the Ethiopian community is going through here, it resonates with me, because I know how hard life was for my grandparents and my parents. It hasn't been that way. I'm standing on the shoulders of my grandfathers, Julius and Abraham, and my grandmothers, Molly and Sarah, and I know that. But I see so many similarities. Of course, there's one thing that's different, and the difference is it makes it a little bit harder, and that's the racial issue, that Africans are black, and as black that they have to do, you have to deal with the kind of racism that whatever it is my grandparents had to deal with, and they did have to deal with. It's not the same. So I see these issues kind of, if you like, immigration rights on the one hand, and a more generic connecting to mainstream American institutions on the other, political parties, other institutions. These are really the keys. And I might simply add here is, and that really the future of these connections is with the youth. All right. I can't emphasize it enough. That they've been educated in American schools. Okay. Their friendships, I've seen this in other, where I grew up in New York City, in Queens. It used to be a middle upper class white neighborhood. I go back there now. It's Indian and Pakistani. I mean, overwhelmingly. There's like 4 mosques within about 10 blocks. We didn't have mosques when I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, or certainly not in Brooklyn where I started. And so that interested me. Now, what interested me about that, and what's the connection here? Indians and Pakistanis are living together. My God, they must be killing each other like they are back home. Not only are they not killing each other here, they socialize together, Hindus and Muslims. They intermarry at very high rates. And I'm seeing the same thing of people from the Horn of Africa. All right. The young, I've mentioned to some of my friends, oh, you got all these problems with Somalia. Oh, you want to speak to some of our Somali friends? You want to speak to our Eritrean friends? You want to speak, i.e., that's where the future lies. They don't bring with them at least the second generation, all the baggage. And I don't mean to use it in a derogatory way. There are real issues back there. But here, somehow or other, you find common grounds, and these people, like the Indians and Pakistanis in Queens, they scratch their heads. What are we fighting about? So these are, in terms of the Ethiopian community in the United States, of course, there's all the political stuff we talked about and what's going on and how to influence that. But on another level, which I consider to be, in the long run, far more effective and important, it's how do we develop these connections across culture? And frankly, there's a different way of looking at it. In one way or another, we're all in a bubble. I am, you are. So how do we burst that bubble or break out of that bubble, and to cooperate with each other and to learn more about one another in such a way, and that when we do, it's going to be a more creative process, a more humane process, call it what you want. So that's a situation that I see the Ethiopian community in, and literally I relate to it in terms of, what were my grandparents doing in the 1920s and the 1930s to break out of their bubble? And I understand that there's limits in doing that, but that's really why I'm interested in this. It's like 100 years later, okay, it's a very similar process.
For me, it's a matter of balance. The younger generation has a better opportunity to cross over or kind of assimilate and not necessarily attach with all the baggage that maybe the first generation comes with. I think there is a little bit of a tug of war, so to speak, between the first and the second generation, because the first generation wants to maintain certain things, and then the second generation, maybe not so much. There are some things that they like to maintain and keep as far as values, as far as traditions, as far as some of the baggages that the first generation brings with, right?
Sure.
So I think the first generation has a lot to contribute still.
Absolutely.
And has the opportunity to maybe create that synergy and create that uniqueness in my mind. That's how I see it. And I think where we begin is having that first dialogue, like we're doing. You are kind of taking the lead in doing just that and opening up this conversation and having this kind of dialogue, asking and maybe making it possible for Americans that may not know a whole lot about Africa to strike an interest and actually know that they have a contribution. The fact that there is a new envoy that is being sent to the Horn of Africa,
right,
with potentially doing certain things. How many of the American people know this? And
they don't have a clue. That's right. Yeah. And here I'm speaking about my own heritage, all right, which is, all right. My family historically are very religious Jews. They're from Eastern Europe, countries today, Poland, another place called Belarus next door to it, Lithuania, that region. And they were deeply religious from everything I know. Okay, there has always been in a long time in Judaism a kind of dynamic tension between the more religious traditional elements and the more secular modern elements. All right. So one way to think about it is, well, the two are going to fly apart. All right. I don't think about it that way. The two feed off one another. Okay. The values that are deep and humane, the humane values, and there are many in Judaism, it comes from the religion and from the religious thinkers. They remind the more secular types, like myself, this is where you come from. I don't forget that. What do we do? What do we contribute, if you like, to our more traditional religious members of our religion? We force them to look at the modern world and the world in which they live, because a lot of their ideas, come out of the past. Now, that can be something that is, again, explosive, and that you wind up going in different directions. But for 2,000 years, basically, that's what's, I think, my own personal take is that's what's given Judaism its dynamism. Was the tension within it between, if you like, the modernizers and the more traditional elements. And at a certain point, whatever camp you're in, if you come to appreciate the others. So the generational thing that you're talking about with Ethiopians, and I've seen it. I know it. Believe me. You're just talking about American Jewish community in the 1940s and 50s, where it was. Again, I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but it's very, very similar on a certain basic level. And the other part of it for the young people is, who are we? Okay, who are we? Are we Ethiopian? But we don't live there. Okay. Are we American? But we feel outside of it. And how to deal with that? That's a really big issue. Okay. And I'm not saying I have any answers to that. I'm just putting it forth as it's a powerful issue that we have to figure out, and that not to figure it out, it becomes a very sad story. And this is true for the Ethiopian community here. I'm hearing stories, people from the Middle East who are caught in this, in tradition on the one hand, modernization on the other. And so how to deal with it creatively, that's a real challenge. I also think it's, while each culture is unique, if you like, but it's a theme that runs through immigrant communities, frankly, for the last 150 years, and that we should learn what is it that's worked and what hasn't worked, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge in the moment.
I think that having a dialogue is the beginning of it.
Of course, yeah. I have a friend. Since I'm retired, I'm not what I call a professional birder, but I like to go out and take photos of birds. And turns out that another retired friend of mine, whose wife happened to have taught one of my daughters, he actually knows a lot more about it than I do, but we get on and we do things together. And I noticed in these Ethiopian Zooms, including some of the earlier ones that you've done, Mame, he's on them. If I post something, go see this Zoom, the people to people Zooms or your Zooms, there's Henryfeldman. And so the other day I was with him and I said, Henry, just tell me, how come you're so interested in Africa? Okay. And more, I'm interested in Africa that he's willing to take the time to see the Zooms and then wants to discuss them. He says, oh, it's simple. My neighbor is Ethiopian. So, I mean, that person, personal contact. Again, I'm not saying it's the only way, but I've seen how that can grow into something that's substance and meaning.
We'll continue to have this kind of conversation, and maybe next time we'll invite others who are interested in just learning and having a conversation and a dialogue.
Thank you very much.